On June 21, 1997, a crowd of 14,284 packed the Great Western Forum in Inglewood, California, to witness something that had never existed before: a professional women's basketball game played under the banner of the WNBA. The New York Liberty, led by center Rebecca Lobo, faced the Los Angeles Sparks and their own towering center, Lisa Leslie, two Olympic teammates from the gold medal-winning 1996 Team USA squad, now standing on opposite sidelines for the league's very first tip-off. Penny Toller scored the first basket in WNBA history for the Sparks. Lobo finished with 16 points, 6 rebounds, and 3 assists in just over 32 minutes, earning Player of the Game honors as New York closed out a tense, hard-fought 67-57 victory. Nearly 5.04 million viewers watched from home on NBC, a number that shattered the league's modest expectations and signaled, almost immediately, that there was a real audience hungry for this kind of basketball. 29 years and 30 seasons later, on that same calendar date, the Liberty and Sparks will meet again, this time with the entire arc of the WNBA's history behind them. The league scheduled the rematch deliberately, placing it on June 21st, 2026, the exact anniversary of the inaugural game, as one of the marquee moments of the WNBA's 30th season. It will also serve as the debut broadcast of ESPN's new Women's Sports Sundays programming block, a primetime showcase the network created specifically to elevate marquee WNBA and NWSL matchups now that Sunday Night Baseball has vacated that window. Few games on this year's calendar carry the symbolic weight of two original franchises returning to where it all began. The growth between those two games is almost difficult to comprehend in a single sitting. In 1997, the league's maximum salary sat at $50,000. This season, max salaries have climbed to $1.4 million. The original WNBA season consisted of just 28 games across 8 franchises. This year's slate runs 44 games, and the league has already confirmed it will expand to 50 games per team in 2027 and likely 52 by 2029. The postseason has undergone its own transformation from a single elimination Final Four format in that first year to a best-of-7 championship series today. What began as an 8-team experiment has grown into a 15-team league this season, with 2 more expansion franchises, the Portland Fire and Toronto Tempo, already up and running, and further growth to 18 teams projected by 2030. Franchise valuations now average around $427 million, a figure that would have seemed like science fiction to the players who took the floor in Inglewood in 1997, several of whom were earning salaries that required off-season jobs just to make ends meet. That history makes today's rematch feel less like a routine regular season game and more like a checkpoint, a chance to measure exactly how far the league has traveled. It is also a reminder of how fragile that original moment really was. Of the league's 8 founding franchises, 4 have since folded outright, and a 5th, the Utah Stars, relocated and rebranded entirely, eventually becoming the Las Vegas Aces. Only the Liberty and Sparks remain standing in recognizable form from that first season, which makes their continued rivalry, born out of 2 of the country's largest media markets, feel less like a coincidence and more like a thread the league has been fortunate enough to keep intact. On the court, the 2 franchises have built a rivalry with real substance to back up the nostalgia. Entering this season, New York and Los Angeles had met 68 times, with the Liberty holding a 35-33 edge in the regular season series. But the Sparks have owned the moments that matter most. Los Angeles is a perfect 2-for-2 against New York in playoff basketball, most memorably in the 2002 WNBA Finals, when Leslie and the Sparks swept Becky Hammond's Liberty in a best-of-3 series to capture their second consecutive championship. That era belonged largely to Los Angeles, with the Sparks reaching the finals in 3 of the league's first 6 seasons and building the kind of championship pedigree that New York, despite 3 finals appearances of its own in that same stretch, was never quite able to match until breaking through with its first title in 2024. This season's version of the rivalry arrives with both teams positioned very differently than they were even a month ago. New York enters the rematch as one of the hottest teams in the league, having stormed back from a rocky opening stretch to become, by several accounts, the WNBA's most dangerous team heading into the second half of the season. Breanna Stewart has carried much of that resurgence personally, particularly during the extended absence of co-star Sabrina Ionescu, who is still working her way back into rhythm after a back injury kept her out for several weeks. The Liberty's depth, anchored by contributors like Maureen Johannes and a retooled rotation under first-year head coach Chris DeMarco, has helped New York remain competitive, even when its 2 biggest stars were not simultaneously at full strength, a sign of the organizational rebuild that followed last year's disappointing first-round playoff exit. Los Angeles, meanwhile, is in the midst of its own transformation. The Sparks made one of the offseason's most notable veteran additions in Nneka Ogwumike, a 10-time All-Star and former MVP who left Seattle to bring championship experience to a young, talented Los Angeles core. Paired with Kelsey Plum, who has turned in arguably the finest stretch of her career, the Sparks entered this rematch with real momentum of their own. Through her first 11 games this season, Plum has averaged a career-best 25.0 points per game, second in the entire league, to go along with 6.4 assists, 2.1 rebounds, and 1.3 steals, while shooting an efficient 54% from the field and 40.5% from beyond the arc. That kind of two-way brilliance has made her the unquestioned engine of the Sparks offense and a focal point for opposing defenses, including whatever game plan New York brings into the Forum's modern successor on Sunday. Unfortunately, the matchup's storybook framing comes with a more complicated injury picture than the league likely hoped for. Cameron Brink, the Sparks' third-year center, and one of the most promising young defensive talents in basketball, is out with an ankle sprain suffered earlier in the week against the Golden State Valkyries. Head coach Lynn Roberts has been candid that Brink's recovery timeline remains uncertain, even as the team praises the toughness she has shown in pushing through what has, in many ways, functioned as her first real extended season of WNBA basketball after injuries limited her rookie campaign. Plum herself was listed as day-to-day heading into the weekend with a lower leg issue, a nagging concern that cost her 3 games earlier this season and one that Roberts has been careful not to rush. Guard Kate Martin also carries a day-to-day knee designation into the contest. On the other side, New York will be without veteran wing Betnijah Laney Hamilton, who remains sidelined with a knee injury of her own. None of those absences diminish the occasion, but they do underscore one of the truths of professional sports in any era. Even matchups 30 years in the making are still, at the end of the day, subject to the unpredictable physical toll of an 82-game equivalent grind compressed into roughly 4 months. Beyond the box score, there is something quietly moving about what this game represents for the people who lived through the league's earliest, most uncertain days. Lisa Leslie, who would go on to play all 12 of her WNBA seasons with the Sparks, win back-to-back titles in 2001 and 2002, capture 3 MVP awards, and become the first player to dunk in a WNBA game, has spoken openly about how unprepared she felt walking into that first matchup against Lobo and the Liberty, admitting she barely slept the night before. Rebecca Lobo, for her part, offered a simple challenge to skeptics ahead of that 1997 opener, suggesting that people watch the game itself before forming judgments about whether women's professional basketball could work. Nearly 3 decades later, the answer to that challenge has been delivered repeatedly through record-breaking television deals, sold-out arenas, and a new generation of stars who grew up idolizing the very players who took the floor in that first game. Beyond the box score, there is something quietly moving about what this game represents for the people who lived through the league's earliest, most uncertain days. Lisa Leslie, who would go on to play all 12 of her WNBA seasons with the Sparks, win back-to-back titles in 2001 and 2002, capture 3 MVP awards, and become the first player to dunk in a WNBA game, has spoken openly about how unprepared she felt walking into that first matchup against Lobo in the Liberty, admitting she barely slept the night before. Rebecca Lobo, for her part, offered a simple challenge to skeptics ahead of that 1997 opener, suggesting that people watch the game itself before forming judgments about whether women's professional basketball could work. Nearly 3 decades later, the answer to that challenge has been delivered repeatedly through record-breaking television deals, sold-out arenas, and a new generation of stars who grew up idolizing the very players who took the floor in that first game. The timing of this milestone also arrives at a charged moment for the league off the court. The WNBA spent much of the early part of this season negotiating a new collective bargaining agreement after the Players Association opted out of its previous deal, with housing and revenue sharing emerging as central sticking points in talks that occasionally stretch past 16 hours at a time. That backdrop of labor tension, layered against record franchise valuations and soaring television ratings, has added an extra layer of significance to a season built around celebrating 30 years of survival and growth. It is a reminder that the league's success has never been guaranteed or automatic, then or now, and that the players stepping onto the court Sunday are continuing a negotiation, in every sense of the word, that began the moment Leslie and Lobo shook hands at center court in 1997. There's also a broader storyline at play around the league's expansion footprint this season that gives added context to why a matchup like this carries so much weight. With Portland and Toronto both fielding teams for the first time, and additional cities still being evaluated for future expansion, the WNBA's growth trajectory increasingly resembles that of a major professional sports league rather than the fledgling operation it once was. ESPN's decision to build an entire primetime programming block around marquee women's sports content rather than treating WNBA coverage as a scheduling afterthought reflects just how dramatically the commercial calculus has shifted. 30 years ago, simply getting cameras inside the forum and convincing a national network to air the broadcast required genuine institutional risk-taking. Today, networks are competing for windows, and a single regular season game between 2 original franchises can anchor an entire new television franchise. That generational thread is precisely what makes Sunday's rematch resonate beyond the Eastern and Western Conference standings. Breanna Stewart and Sabrina Ionescu represent the Liberty's current era of stardom in much the same way Lobo once did. Kelsey Plum and a rejuvenated Rickea Jackson carry that torch for the Sparks, much as Leslie once did alongside Toller. The jerseys have changed, the shot clock strategy has evolved, the television production values bear no resemblance to a single NBC broadcast camera crew in 1997, and the salaries have grown by a factor of nearly 30. But the basic premise driving both franchises onto the floor remains exactly as it was on that June afternoon in Inglewood. 2 original organizations representing 2 of the country's largest markets competing for a win that matters while carrying, whether they fully realize it in the moment or not, a piece of the WNBA's history forward into its next 30 years,